you live on the thing? Okay, 10.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the World Seed channel today. Our topic is tackling the nematode challenge with best practices. My name is Cosmas Kyengo and I'm going to be your moderator. And I'm privileged to have the honor of interviewing a professor in nematology, Professor Driekie Fourie, a very well-renowned professor in that particular subject matter, with over 30 years experience researching on the nematodes problem in Africa. So it's my pleasure and a privilege to allow Professor Driekie to introduce herself and give us an introduction of the subject of nematodes in Africa. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you, Cosmas. It's wonderful to be here again with you today and to share information that builds on yesterday's talk about nematodes, the unseen enemy. And as Cosmas said, I'm actually 32 years, been active in the nematology discipline. And I just recently joined Syngenta as the technical product lead in Seedcare for Africa, Middle East.
And what a privilege for somebody like Cosmas, who is an agronomist, to be interviewing such a person like Professor Driekie in this particular subject matter. Now, Professor, pests and diseases are visible. Farmers can see them, they can manage them. But what of nematodes?
Yes, Cosmas, that's a very valid question. And I will just quickly recap today some of the info that we shared yesterday to get everyone on the same level. So usually farmers can see pests and diseases that appear above ground on their crops. And they can do something about it. They then have the knowledge to treat the crops and get rid of those pests or diseases. But with nematodes, those that are feeding underground on the below parts of plants, they're not visible. They are microscopic small and therefore farmers don't know about them. I just have to mention here that we have to remember in crops like wheat and also in some grasses, we have nematodes that attack the kernels of the wheat and the seeds of the grasses. And farmers should also be knowledgeable about those above ground symptoms. But let's go to the underground, Cosmas. So it's very important to remember that the diet of us humans consists, 80% of that consists of plants. So, and if you take that and we realize that 40% of yields are lost to pests and diseases, we realize how big this problem is and how important it is to protect crops and to produce them sustainably. So nematodes cause about 15% yield losses in crops. And that is what I referred to yesterday as the big giveaway. that is the part of the crop that is produced by the farmer and that he unknowingly, he or she basically gives to the nematodes to eat. And that does not contribute towards food insecurity.
And when do you think that nematode risk is higher than what many farmers anticipate?
Yes, definitely. We've seen it. We are so lucky in South Africa. We had done several surveys, nematode surveys in our grain production areas. And we've seen that the high pressure due to nematodes and the intermediate pressure, that dominates in our grain producing areas. And therefore, farmers must know that it goes beyond the hot spot areas. If they see these smaller spots in fields with diseased plants like stunting or wilting or even dying of plants, usually they must know that that is typical of nematode damage. But farmers need to know the status of nematodes in their fields because it's everywhere in crop fields, and it just depends on the right environmental conditions or favorable environmental conditions, a susceptible host, and other factors that will cause it to explode basically and cause damage. And another very important factor is we have to realize we cannot completely eradicate nematodes. There's no way. Not one single strategy or strategies combined can do that because they have superior survival skills, Cosmas.
Now, assume I'm a farmer and the nematodes are below the soil. How can a farmer really understand what is happening below the soil?
That's very important, and I just basically said it. They have to look at the crop, they have to do inspections about these above ground symptoms. Sometimes when we have other adverse conditions like excessive rainfall, it can even cause bigger parts of a field that is highly infected with nematodes to show damage. But when this damage is seen, it's too late. And in the first image here, we can clearly see that the soybean plants next to the healthy plants, those plants are so infected, the roots are so abnormally transformed due to nematode feeding that they won't be able to yield any crop there in that particular instance. Also, the potato next to it, it's crucial. That farmer won't get monetary value for those tubers. But most important, the high inoculation densities that exist in those fields where these crops were grown, that is our problem, and that's where we will have to come in with management and see that we reduce them to allow sustainable crop production.
Now, I see a complexity of damage caused by nematodes in the crops. How do you quantify that?
Yes, so globally, the annual losses to specifically plant parasitic nematodes in a variety of crops is estimated at about $125 billion per year. That shows you the extent of the damage caused by these invisible little microorganisms.
Now, for example, this the worst case scenario is that a plant has been attacked by nematodes. There are other pests associated there. There are also secondary infections associated with the same. How do you explain this as a professor who has been following up on this nematode infestation in our soils?
Yes, unfortunately, Cosmas, nematodes are not necessarily alone causing the damage. And if we have the combined effect of nematodes and other microbes like pathogenic fungi, as can be seen in these photos, then we even have bigger yield losses and we even have bigger problems for our farmers. So farmers must inspect the roots to make sure about these soil-borne disease complexes.
Are there cases where these three components can exist at the same time? you have nematodes, you have other pests, you have diseases in the same locality.
Yes.
Is it possible?
Yes, I've seen a few years ago cotton produced in the Uppington area, Northern Cape Province, where we had root knot nematodes and fusarium, and it was absolute disaster. So that does occur together.
Wow. Then it appears like, managing nematodes is a very challenging exercise.
It
What
is.
is your comment on that?
It is, Cosmas. There are many factors that cause it to be challenging. In the first place, these nematodes have superior survival strategies. For example, I mentioned yesterday, the cysts have very hard cuticles, which make them very difficult to control with nematicides, especially contact nematicides. The root knot nematodes and these cyst nematodes, each female can produce up to 1,000 eggs at a time. And these eggs are protected in the root knot nematode egg masses because it's basically embedded in a gelatin matrix. So that protects them also against adverse conditions, chemicals, and also then predators, for example. Important is the infective stages, life stages of these two nematode genera that will hatch from those eggs. Only 10% of those will only hatch at a later stage. So we have this continual hatching of these infective juveniles. So a farmer may apply nematode management, but a few weeks later there are again freshly hatched infective stages. So that is a big problem. And then, of course, the discovery of new, more pathogenic species. We have to be on the lookout for that.
Wow. Then what are the major strategies for managing nematodes in this complexity you have just explained?
Cosmas, today I will basically focus on the 4 main pillars of integrated pest management. You know, integrated pest management is a very wide term, and I will basically just touch on these 4, and they are chemical, cultural, host plant resistance, and then biological control. And I again advise our farmers to go and have a look online at this book, where we as experts contribute towards the chapters on various crops. It has been compiled by the world-renowned Emeritus Professor Richard Sikora from Bonn University, and it gives you a state-of-the-art visions and strategies to control nematodes.
Wow. Now, so we know that chemical nematicides is what many farmers have been used to.
Yes.
What do you have to say about that?
Yes, Cosmas, of course, chemical or nematicide has superior efficacy. And I believe that we will never be able to produce crops sustainably in the presence of nematodes without it. It has been, and it still is, the most popular and widely used strategy, especially in commercial farming. So the big benefit of chemicals is that it basically knocks down the population density of the damaging nematodes very quickly. And that allows return on investment to the farmer, and then also it allows sustainable production of the crops. But unfortunately, as we all know, the old generation nematicides are withdrawn from the market because of basically their unfavorable profile in terms of environmental contamination and also their adverse effects on non-target organisms, including animals, humans, and beneficial organisms. But luckily we have the new generation products coming in, that's coming available, and we see them entering the market on a continuous basis. And I call them the softer products because they basically have very little impact or no impact, preferably, on the environment and the non-beneficial or non-target organisms. And that is what we need for sustainable agriculture. And before we move on to cultural control, I just want to advise and ask you to visit our booth. Syngenta really has something big coming in terms of nematode control, and it's in the form of a seed treatment.
Just to interject you there, is the new generational technologies having better profiles in
Yes.
terms of impact to the environment?
Yes, definitely. And I believe without those characteristics, it will be quite impossible these days to register a nematicide. So one have to make sure that a nematicide adheres to those guidelines.
Oh, thank you so much, Professor. Now, traditionally, many farmers have been using cultural practices to manage pests, as we all know. But in terms of cultural practices, do we still have place for cultural practices in managing nematodes?
Definitely. Remember, there are cases where nematicides cannot be used, especially in our developing agricultural sector. It's not necessarily something that our emerging farmers can use. So there are other options like under cultural control. There's a myriad of options, of which I really today I'm going to focus on plowing, fallowing, and then of course weed control. So in terms of plowing, there's a lot of controversy about this, but some of the research shows that it has a negative impact in terms of it reduces the nematode population densities, because when you take the underground or the soil from deeper levels and put it on the surface, there's desiccation of a certain portion of the nematode community that will die because of desiccation, and also the higher temperatures at the surface. But of course, you cannot rely on that alone. That's impossible according to me. Fallowing is another strategy that can be used. But here, I need to accentuate that clean fallow should be practiced. I want to tell you an incident. I visited a farmer just shortly, I think it was 2011, in the middle of winter, Cosmas, in the Free State province of our country. And he said to me, come to me to the field. There's the John Deere Bossy. You know, when we drive through the grain production areas, in winter it's like yellowish when it flowers. And he uprooted it and he showed me the roots. And there were galls on the roots. And I said, it seems like we have a problem here, root knot nematodes, but the root knot nematode species that occur in that area, they are thermophiles. So I took those roots back to the lab, and when I inspected them, the root knot nematode females were there. But luckily they haven't produced eggs yet. So I called the farmer and said, listen, please get rid of those weeds, because as the temperature will increase towards the end of the winter, you will have a problem. These females are they're just waiting for higher temperatures to produce the eggs, and then it's a nightmare. So farmers must be aware, weeds are a source of inoculum, nematode inoculum, because most of them are highly susceptible to nematodes.
Wow. Wow. That is amazing, eh?
Yes.
And what's the role of host plants? Because historically, we know that host plants can also hamper pests.
Yes.
They can also enhance, the spread of certain pests.
That's
Is it
true.
the same case with the nematodes?
That's true. So, according to me, and maybe because my MSc and PhD studies focused on resistant breeding in soybean towards root knot nematodes, I saw the value of using this specific approach, and it's hugely underestimated, especially here. I can tell you that it's not priority to breed for nematode resistance, especially in South Africa. And I have seen that using cultivars with different levels of resistance can reduce nematode, root knot nematode densities from 60 to more than 90%. Now, why won't we use that? It's crucial that farmers realize and have the information that this exists. On the top of this slide, you can see a susceptible root system of a host with a lot of root galling, extensive, and severe damage being caused because a lot of females feed there and produce eggs. In the middle, you will see there we use or we illustrate a cultivar that has intermediate levels of resistance, and immediately you can see the substantial reduction in galling of the roots because less females feed and then less damage. And at the bottom, one can see a highly resistant cultivar's roots where we have little or no galling and then less damage. But please take note that with a resistant cultivar, it does not mean immunity. The nematodes will still attack it, it will still feed on it, but the plant has characteristics that see that the nematode cannot develop optimally, and that is chemically based or in terms of the anatomy of the plant.
Wow. Of late, we hear of Professor Driekie, we hear of biologicals, safer to use and stuff. Do we have opportunity to use biologicals also in managing nematodes?
Yes, of course. That is a growing field, if I can mention that. When I started off as a nematologist, this was basically non-existing. There have been reports about biologicals that have nematicidal attributes, but it was basically, we used the nematicides and other cultural methods basically. So entering the market is also quite a number of products. It's becoming more and more popular. And also because of the concern that people have that we have to, and us too, that we have to conserve our natural resources, our environment, and so on. So these products usually contain live organisms. For example, we get the nematode trapping fungi that basically forms a ring around nematodes and then kind of restricts the body and it dies. In terms of bacteria, it's basically the secondary metabolites that cause paralysis or death of nematodes. And there are numerous products. We have bacillus species, for example, that are very well known to be used like this. So I believe that this field will just keep growing and we will just see more and more products coming to the market.
Oh, I love that confirmation that biologicals, cultural, and nematicide, as we all know it, is still going to be needed as we journey in the ways of trying to improve productivity for farmers. Now, what are the various challenges we find in managing nematodes in our fields?
Yes, I'm going to conclude now and with the next two slides, limited knowledge. We have to make sure our farmers know more about nematodes. We have to equip our extensionists so that they can transfer this knowledge. But farmers also have the responsibility to find out more about nematodes. Go to farmer information days, ask the different crop industries. They will assist them to help them to get in contact with the experts. I think all of us realize the fact that climate change is happening. It's a big game changer. There are research that shows that models forecast that nematodes will go through more life cycles when temperatures are higher. That means more offspring, more damage, less food to eat for us humans. Then I want to mention a very important thing today, and that is a lot of farmers approach me and say, but listen, On rain-fed maize, I cannot use a nematicide. It's just too expensive. And for those farmers, I just want to say, make sure you know about the status of the target nematodes in those fields. Make sure that you manage them earlier than later, because if it's too late, you won't be able to produce any crop anymore on those fields. And then, like I said yesterday, and I'm not going to stand still, our current crop rotation systems, they are very conducive of high nematode population buildups. Crops like sunflower, dry bean, soybean, wheat, potato, very susceptible. So, and then the last thing that I will say is, of course, the new species. That's a challenge because some of these species, they are so resilient and it's so difficult to control them.
Awesome. It appears there is no silver bullet
Yes,
to
and
this
here,
problem.
that's true. That's
Yes.
true. But where in life do you get a silver bullet for your problems? So it's very important as more farmers adopt conservation and regenerative agricultural practices, cover cropping is coming more to the foreground. Very important here. I was part of a team. We basically took each crop in cover crop mixes, and it was funded by Potato South Africa. The project is still going on with my colleagues. And we basically we screened those crops for their host suitability to the root knot nematodes and the lesion nematodes. And we found that crops like the clovers, very susceptible to both these genera. A crop like sun hemp, it will decrease numbers of root knot nematodes, but it will increase lesion nematode numbers. So if a farmer knows what the nematode problem is on its field, him or her won't use sun hemp if lesion nematodes occur there. And then I think what is very important is that we see products with a dual function. We have seen that there are products on the market with nematicidal and fungicidal action. Some has nematicidal and fungal insecticidal action, and that I think is very crucial that we have to keep in mind in future.
So in simple terms, we are talking about integrated pest management strategy for
Yes.
us to be able to manage this unseen enemy that is lying below the soil. And what we tend to see is the crop on the surface of the land that is already affected by the unseen pest. If
Yes.
you are to leave the audience with one message, what will that message be, Professor Driekie?
I would like to say knowledge is power. We have to equip ourselves to the best of our abilities. The same with our producers. We are working towards the greater good, and that is to see that people are fed across the globe.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have been your moderator, Cosmas Kyengo, Seedcare Strategy Planning and the Key Account Manager for Africa and Middle East, working for Syngenta Seedcare team. And I have been privileged to host a great scientist, Professor Driekie Fourie. Behind her is 32 years of experience working on the same subject matter of nematodes. Thank you so
Cosmas.
much, Professor, for finding time to come and share the knowledge with the audience. I really appreciate your time,
Thank
and
you.
thank you so much.
Thank you, Cosmas.
I appreciate it.